Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a highly objective, journalistic look at something absolutely fascinating, the 22 Swertres Cycles System. Specifically, we're diving into version 6.3. Now, whether you're a math whiz or just someone curious about data, what we're unpacking today is literally a masterclass in how analysts try to force structure onto massive, chaotic sets of numbers. We're not here to endorse this method, right? We're just here to break down the incredible architecture of a highly technical intelligence system and see exactly what it can teach us about deep data analysis.
I mean, it's the ultimate question, isn't it? How do you predict the unpredictable? Look, we all know lottery draws are entirely independent, totally random events. A machine tumbles some numbered balls and, well, whatever pops out, pops out. But try telling that to a human brain that is absolutely hardwired to find patterns. So what actually happens when you throw advanced pattern intelligence, massive historical datasets, and Bayesian probabilities at absolute randomness? Well, that is exactly the puzzle this V6.3 system is trying to solve. To really get this, we've got to speak their language first and define the system using its own advanced terminology. The 22 Swertres Cycles System V6.3 is described as an adaptive intelligence model. It interprets high-frequency transitional lottery data to calculate what these analysts call corrective statistical probabilities. Okay, what does that actually mean for us? In plain English, we're looking at a mathematical framework that groups numbers into 22 distinct cycles. It then constantly tracks the behavior, the gaps, and the frequency of those cycles to try and forecast what is mathematically, quote-unquote, overdue.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer today, so you know exactly how we're going to unpack all this dense data. 1. The Swertres cycle system. 2. Mechanics of a pressure cycle. 3. The saturation effect. 4. The redistribution window. And finally, number 5, targets and missing bases. Okay, let's dive right into this with section 1, the Swertres cycle system. To really wrap our heads around this framework, we have to look at how it judges a win, because the system doesn't just care if a number won. It actually grades the quality of that win using a metric they call the efficiency increment, or EI for short. When a cycle hits, the system asks, okay, was this a clean delivery or a recycled delivery? A clean delivery means the cycle produced a brand new base pattern that we haven't seen recently. Awesome. But a recycled delivery? That means the system just looped a previous pattern. For instance, looking at the May 12th data, the result 561 was a cycle 4 hit, but the system flagged it as a recycled delivery because that exact same base had already hit back on April 9th. And because it was recycled, the system actually docks its efficiency increment score. Honestly, it's a brilliant way to filter out repetitive noise so you can spot actual statistical movement. And this brilliantly illustrates how the V6.3 system meticulously categorizes every single cycle into a rigorous tier and regime hierarchy based on gap days and mathematical pressure. Just think about Tier 1 for a second. Cycle 13 is currently sitting in a regime called critical dormancy, and it's carrying a massive pressure score of 94 out of 100. Then moving down the list, you've got Cycle 21 in recovery dormancy, while way down at the bottom, Cycles 3 and 4 are hanging out in Tier 5 under a saturation status. So this isn't just a list of numbers. Think of it as a live, breathing map of statistical tension across the entire data environment. Which brings us to section 2, mechanics of a pressure cycle. So how exactly does the system calculate a pressure cycle anyway? Well, the documentation uses a really great physical metaphor. It asks us to picture the lottery system as a giant, incredibly pressurized steam boiler. Every single draw that goes by without a hit from a specific cycle, that adds steam to that cycle's section of the boiler. The system tracks this using something called age-weighted silence, which basically means the longer the gap, the exponentially heavier the mathematical weight of that silence gets. Now, inside these highly pressurized cycles, certain combinations that haven't hit yet act as the release valves. When the pressure simply gets too high, those specific valves become the most likely spots for a statistical eruption. 94. Just think about that. That is the current pressure score out of 100 for cycle 13. By isolating this one single number, the whole abstract idea of critical dormancy suddenly feels incredibly immediate, right? It's tangible. Cycle 13 isn't just loosely overdue. According to the V6.3 formula, which takes the current gap and divides it by the historical maximum gap, it has been pushed to 94% of its absolute historical limit for silence. It is practically bursting. The system actually maps out this mathematical escalation in 3 very distinct steps. Step 1 is the normal state. This is where hits are happening safely within a cycle's average historical length, maybe every 5 to 8 days. No big deal. Step 2 is the pressure state. This kicks in when a cycle misses for 2 or even 3 times its normal length. The steam is really building up now. And then finally, we hit step 3, the burst regime. This is what the analysts call an inevitable symmetry break. It's that moment where the mathematical tension violently corrects itself with an explosive hit, finally letting all that built-up pressure out. Moving right along to section 3, the saturation effect. But here's where it gets wild. Sometimes that pressure release actually gets blocked. On May 12th, the system tracked this totally fascinating anomaly they classified as A34. Let's walk through this timeline together. At 2 p.m., boom, a hit for cycle 2. Then at 5 p.m., a hit for cycle 4. And then at 9 p.m., a hit for cycle 3. So in a single day, 3 low-digit, so-called easy cycles completely dominated the drawboard in this massive cluster event. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the V6.3 model doesn't just look at this cluster and say, oh, what a weird coincidence. No, it diagnoses it as a systemic condition called environmental saturation. Because these low-digit cycles hit back to back to back, the model argues they are essentially consuming the oxygen in the mathematical environment. They create this environmental barrier that is literally starving those high-tiered dormant cycles, like our friend cycle 13, and stopping them from releasing their pressure. In the system's terms, it drastically reduces the entropy velocity of the entire board. Let's jump into section 4, the redistribution window. So the crucial point is what happens next? What occurs when the environment becomes completely saturated like that? The system automatically shifts into a defined response known as the redistribution window. The model dictates that immediately after a multi-cycle cluster, like that crazy one on May 12th, the system gets mathematically forced into a post-saturation phase. During the specific window, which the system estimates will last for the next 3 to 5 draw sessions, the statistical probability of a dormant, high-pressure cycle finally hitting goes through the roof. It is dramatically elevated. The system is essentially bracing for a violent snapback toward those overdue numbers. And looking at the data, we can see exactly why they're anticipating that massive snapback. Because of that May 12th saturation, we've got a secondary crisis called anomaly A33 that is escalating dangerously fast. Just think about these gap days. Cycle 21 has been dead silent for over 53 days. Cycle 14, over 32 days. Cycle 17, over 25 days. These major, heavy-hitting cycles got absolutely zero relief during that saturation event. So this convergence is tightening by the minute, and the system is waving massive red flags, marking this as a highly volatile environment. Let's move to our final section and see how this builds: targets and missing bases. So what specific numbers is the system actually watching to capture this inevitable pressure release? Remember those release valves we talked about a few minutes ago? Well, here they are. The intelligence briefing has isolated the primary missing bases for these top-tier pressure cycles. For our dormant giant, cycle 13, analysts are locked in on the structures 122, 899, and 656. For cycle 21, the missing links they're targeting are 991, 422, 020, and 446. The whole strategic recommendation of the V6.3 logic right now is to completely ignore all those recent trends of low digits and focus exclusively on these specific correction structures that are just waiting in the wings. And beyond those critical zones, they also maintain a secondary watch list. Cycle 11 is hyper-focused on one single final missing base, 625. Cycle 19 is being monitored closely for a continuation search phase, but I've got to say, perhaps the most fascinating outlier on this list is Cycle 22. The pure triple watch. It is currently waiting on bases like 444 and 777. According to the internal documents, this cycle completely defies their standard permutation logic. It's so wildly different that it requires its own entirely unique scoring model. It is a true anomaly in the data. We'll wrap up today's explainer with this incredibly powerful grounding disclaimer pulled directly from the source material itself. It reads, WideView does not solve predictions. We build intelligence. PCSO Swertres draws are fully independent random events. I think that's a vital reminder for all of us. No matter how sophisticated the Bayesian probabilities get, no matter how insanely detailed these environmental saturation models become, absolute randomness remains the undisputed master of the draw. But it does leave us with a pretty provocative final thought. As analytical frameworks continue to evolve into massive, complex beasts like V6.3, can human intelligence ever truly map the boundaries of absolute chance? Or are we all just finding beautiful shapes in the static? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.